In Houston, inside the gleaming arena of Lakewood Church, a quiet old man in the back row was about to disrupt America's largest megachurch without saying a word. What began as another polished Sunday broadcast of smiles and sermons turned deadly serious for egos when Joel Osteen's own security team moved to remove a non-participating guest. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical churchgoer. For decades, he had served as a real-life warrior and spiritual soldier, a martial arts legend, Air Force veteran, and man of faith, known for facing darkness with calm conviction. When Lakewood's security team tried to escort him out for disruption, they had no idea they were challenging a man who conquered conflict through stillness. Chuck responded not with fists but with silence, so commanding it dismantled the megachurch's entire illusion of control, triggering a confrontation that reached far beyond the pulpit. What began as a Sunday service of spectacle would become a spiritual reckoning for America's largest church. And the lights of Lakewood would never shine the same after one man refused to stand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sunlight streamed through the vast windows of Lakewood Church, casting long rectangles of gold across polished floors. The cavernous arena, once home to the Houston Rockets, now America's largest megachurch, hummed with the synchronized energy of worship. 20,000 voices blended into a single, powerful chorus that swelled toward the rafters. Hands raised skyward like a forest of hope. Cameras glided overhead on silent tracks, broadcasting every moment to millions worldwide. At the center of it all stood Pastor Joel Osteen, bathed in the precise glow of stage lights, his smile radiant and unwavering. Tall and trim in a tailored Navy suit, he commanded the space with practiced ease. No notes, no stumbles. Just the polished flow of inspiration that had built his empire of faith. God doesn't see your past. Joel's voice resonated through perfect acoustics, each word carefully modulated. He sees your future. He doesn't focus on what you've lost, he focuses on what you're becoming. The crowd erupted in applause, right on cue. Joel paced the stage with deliberate strides, his movements choreographed through years of performance. Behind him, a massive screen displayed his image magnified 50 times, every expression precisely calibrated for maximum impact. In the production booth overlooking the sanctuary, technicians monitored multiple camera feeds, adjusting lighting and sound with quiet precision. This wasn't just church, it was a production. A spectacle of hope wrapped in high definition and delivered with corporate efficiency. Look at your neighbor and say, "Neighbor, your breakthrough is coming," Joel instructed, his voice lifting with practiced enthusiasm. The congregation turned to each other, repeating the phrase with fervent nods. Joel watched with satisfaction as the energy rippled through his flock. This was the moment he lived for 20,000 people, moving as one under the gentle guidance of his words. In the back row, far from the lights and energy, a man sat quietly. Unlike those around him, he didn't stand during the praise music or repeat the affirmations. He simply observed, hands folded in his lap, his weathered face composed in thoughtful attention. Chuck Norris hadn't come for the spectacle. At 75, his face carried the lines of a life fully lived, his posture still straight but without pretense. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, nothing that would draw attention. The martial arts legend and action star had long ago stepped away from Hollywood's glare, preferring family and faith to fame's hollow echo. He hadn't planned to attend Lakewood that morning. A storm had diverted his flight to Houston, leaving him with an unexpected Sunday layover. Something had drawn him here, not celebrity curiosity, but a quiet desire to understand this modern phenomenon of faith as entertainment. Near the main entrance, Marcus Hall scanned the crowd with practiced efficiency. As head of Lakewood's security team, the former Marine had developed an eye for disruption. Today's service was running smoothly just as Pastor Joel liked it. Marcus adjusted his earpiece, listening to updates from his team stationed throughout the massive space. "Sir," a voice crackled through his earpiece. "We've got someone in Section 23 who's not participating, just sitting there watching everyone." Marcus frowned. "Disruptive?" "Not exactly, but he's just staring. People are noticing." "I'll check it out," Marcus replied, moving with purpose through the outer aisle. On stage, Joel shifted seamlessly into his sermon's main points, his gestures timed perfectly with the background music that swelled beneath his words. "Your destiny is not determined by your critics. What other people think about you is not nearly as important as what you think about yourself." The crowd responded with amens and applause. In the front row, Lisa Osteen, Joel's wife and partner in ministry, nodded supportively. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile unwavering, but those who knew her well might notice the subtle weariness in her eyes. 15 years of Sunday spectacles had taught her to maintain the facade while her inner thoughts wandered elsewhere. Today, her attention kept drifting to a commotion near the back of the church. Security personnel were moving with unusual purpose along the outer aisles. She caught Marcus Hall's determined stride as he made his way toward the back rows. On stage, Joel continued without missing a beat, unaware of the small disturbance brewing in his perfectly orchestrated service. "God didn't create you to be average. He created you to be a champion." Marcus Hall reached Section 23 and immediately spotted the subject of concern. An older man sitting still, while everyone around him stood in worship. Something about him seemed familiar, but Marcus couldn't place it. What he did notice was the intense focus in the man's eyes. Not hostile, but deeply observant, in a way that felt almost intrusive. Marcus nodded to two other security team members who positioned themselves nearby. He tapped his earpiece. "I've got eyes on him." Standing by. On stage, Joel's sermon reached its crescendo. "Remember, when God is for you, who can be against you? The forces that are for you are greater than the forces that are against you." The music swelled. The crowd cheered. The cameras panned across the sea of uplifted hands, and in the back row, Chuck Norris remained perfectly still, watching not the spectacle, but the spaces between where authenticity either lived or died. As the praise music transitioned to a quieter worship song, Marcus received another message in his earpiece. "Pastor Joel is asking about the disruption in Section 23. Marcus blinked in surprise. He hadn't realized Joel had noticed from stage. The man wasn't causing any actual disruption, just sitting quietly, but in the perfectly choreographed environment of Lakewood, even stillness could feel like resistance. "Tell Pastor, we're monitoring. No action necessary," Marcus replied. But the response came back immediately. "Pastor says, check it out. Now." Marcus straightened his tie and approached the seated man, leaning in close to speak without disrupting those nearby. "Excuse me, sir. Is everything all right?" Chuck looked up, his expression calm. "Yes. Just observing." Something in his voice, the quiet authority, the lack of apology, made Marcus pause. He'd seen this face before, but couldn't place it in this context. "Sir, we've noticed you're not participating. At Lakewood, we encourage everyone to engage with the service." Chuck's eyes held no challenge, only a thoughtful assessment. "I'm engaging in my own way." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. There was no hostility here, no disruption to justify removal. Yet his orders were clear. "I understand, sir. But is there a problem?" A woman in the next seat leaned over, her eyes suddenly wide with recognition. "Wait, aren't you Chuck Norris?" The name rippled through nearby seats. Heads turned. Phones appeared. Marcus froze, the recognition hitting him like a physical blow. On stage, Joel sensed the energy shift in the back section, a ripple of distraction threatening his carefully maintained flow. He smoothly transitioned to a prayer, buying time while watching the commotion from the corner of his eye. "Let's bow our heads together," he instructed, voice never wavering. "Father, we thank you for your presence here today." In the back row, Marcus Hall found himself suddenly caught in an impossible situation. He'd been sent to remove a disruptive attendee, who turned out to be Chuck Norris, American icon, martial arts legend, and well-known man of faith. And Chuck simply sat there, watching the unfolding drama with the calm of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone. Elder Henry, an 80-year-old church leader who had served since before the move to the arena, observed the scene from his seat nearby. His weathered face creased into a slight, knowing smile. He leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I believe we're about to witness something unexpected today." In the front row, Lisa Osteen watched the distant commotion with growing concern. Something was happening that wasn't in the program. And in her husband's world, deviation was disaster. As Joel's amplified voice led the congregation in prayer, the real drama was just beginning to unfold in the back row, far from the lights, cameras, and carefully maintained illusion of perfection. Joel Osteen's prayer continued, smooth and melodic, but his eyes tracked the growing disturbance in the back section. The sight of Marcus Hall, usually the picture of discretion surrounded by whispering congregants, sent an uncomfortable prickle down his spine. The prayer reached its natural conclusion as Joel's mind raced through contingency plans. And all God's people said, "Amen." The congregation responded in unison. Joel's smile never faltered as he nodded to the worship leader. "Let's praise him one more time." Music surged through the arena, buying Joel precious moments as he pressed his earpiece. "What's happening back there?" he whispered, the sound masked by the building chorus. The production director's voice came through clearly. "Chuck Norris is in the audience." Security approached him for not participating. Joel nearly missed a step. "Chuck Norris? The Chuck Norris?" "Yes, Pastor. Marcus is speaking with him now." Joel's mind whirred with calculations. A celebrity presence could be leveraged, a testimony, a photo opportunity, a social media moment. But the context felt wrong. Why hadn't he been informed? Why hadn't Chuck come through the VIP entrance? And why was security confronting him? In the back section, the whispers had grown into a small commotion. "It's really him," someone murmured. Phone already recording. "Chuck Norris at Lakewood?" Marcus Hall stood frozen in indecision, the weight of his mistake pressing down like a physical burden. The quiet man he'd been ordered to remove was a cultural icon, and worse, a man known for his genuine faith. This wasn't some disruptive influence. This was Chuck Norris. "Sir, Marcus began, then faltered. Chuck remained seated, his expression unchanged, neither angry nor amused, simply present. "You're just doing your job," he said quietly. "I understand." The simple grace of the response only deepened Marcus's discomfort. He glanced toward the stage, silently pleading for direction. But Joel was mid-performance, his attention seemingly elsewhere. "Maybe I should go," Chuck offered, noting the growing distraction around them. "I didn't come to disrupt." "No, sir. Please." Marcus found himself suddenly protective of the man he'd been sent to remove. "Let me sort this out." Near the media booth, Tina Alvarez adjusted her camera lens, focusing on the unexpected drama unfolding in the back rows. As a field reporter for a local news station, she'd been assigned to cover Osteen's service for a human interest piece. Now she sensed a very different story, developing something far more compelling than the planned puff piece. "Are you getting this?" she whispered to her cameraman. "Chuck Norris is here, and security's confronting him." Her cameraman nodded, already capturing footage. This could go viral. On stage, Joel smoothly transitioned into an announcement segment, his mind racing to process this unexpected development. Chuck Norris in his church should have been a blessing, a marketing opportunity, a powerful endorsement. Instead, security had somehow created a potential PR nightmare. "Before we continue," Joel announced, voice honeyed with practiced sincerity, "I want to acknowledge all our first-time visitors. Lakewood Church is a place where everyone belongs." The irony of his words wasn't lost on those witnessing the scene in the back. Chuck Norris, apparently not belonging enough to sit quietly, offered a small, resigned smile. The congregation's attention was now clearly divided. Those aware of the situation craned their necks or discreetly held up phones. The perfectly synchronized worship had fractured, the collective focus splintering as whispers spread. Lisa Osteen noticed the shift immediately. Years of observing crowds had given her a sensitivity to energy changes that even Joel sometimes missed. She turned slightly, following the collective gaze toward the back rows, where security personnel huddled around someone she couldn't quite see. Joel continued from stage, maintaining his rhythm despite the growing distraction. "At Lakewood, we believe in lifting people up, not tearing them down." In the back section, Marcus made his decision. "Sir, please, stay. I'll straighten this out." But it was too late. The disturbance had reached Joel's awareness threshold. With perfect showmanship, he paused mid-sentence, holding the silence just long enough to recapture everyone's attention. "Folks, it seems we have a situation that needs addressing." His voice remained warm, controlled. "Let's all take a breath together." The music faded. The massive screens displayed Joel's concerned but composed expression. 20,000 people held their collective breath. "I'm hearing that we have a special guest with us today," Joel continued, his tone suggesting this had been part of the plan all along. "And it appears there's been some misunderstanding with our security team." The cameras panned to the back section, where Chuck Norris sat calmly amid the commotion. His image appeared on the giant screens, and a ripple of excitement passed through the congregation. Some stood for a better view. Others whispered in disbelief. Chuck himself seemed the least affected person in the room, his weathered face revealing nothing beyond quiet dignity. Joel's professional smile widened. "Well, this is unexpected. Would our guest mind standing so everyone can see him?" It was a masterful recovery, turning potential embarrassment into a celebrity moment. The congregation erupted in applause as cameras focused on Chuck. But Chuck didn't stand. He simply remained seated, hands folded in his lap, expression serene but resolute. The applause faltered, then died. An uncomfortable silence fell over the arena. Marcus leaned in close. "Sir, Pastor Joel is acknowledging you." Chuck nodded once. "I hear him." The silence stretched. Joel's smile remained fixed, but those who knew him well could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't following the script. The power dynamic he took for granted had subtly shifted. "Perhaps our guest would like to share a few words?" Joel suggested, voice still warm but with an edge of tension. Again, Chuck didn't move. From her place in the front row, Lisa Osteen felt a strange sense of admiration for this quiet resistance. In a space where everything was performance, someone was simply refusing to perform. Elder Henry leaned forward in his seat, watching with growing interest. In 60 years of ministry, he'd never seen anyone so effortlessly command attention by doing absolutely nothing. Joel cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the perfect acoustics. "Well, while our guest decides if he'd like to join me on stage, let me share something about hospitality." But the spell was broken. The congregation's focus remained fixed on the back row, where Chuck Norris sat, not defiant, not challenging, simply present in a way that made all the surrounding spectacle feel suddenly hollow. Tina Alvarez zoomed her camera in tighter, capturing the contrast between Joel's practiced performance and Chuck's authentic stillness. "This is gold," she whispered to her cameraman. "Absolute gold. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Marcus Hall stood nearby, caught between loyalty to his pastor and growing respect for the quiet dignity of the man he'd been sent to remove. Something profound was happening, though he couldn't quite articulate what. Joel attempted to regain control, his voice rising with practiced inspiration. "You know, the Bible tells us that some have entertained angels without knowing it." But the energy had shifted irreversibly. In the vast arena, designed to amplify Joel Osteen's presence, every eye remained fixed on the man who had yet to say a single word. And in that moment of suspended certainty, the true sermon was about to begin. The silence stretched across Lakewood Church like a taut wire. Joel Osteen stood at center stage, microphone in hand, smile unwavering but eyes betraying the calculations racing behind them. The cameras that typically framed his every gesture with reverent precision now panned uncertainly between him and the seated figure in the back row. "Well," Joel said with a forced chuckle, "it seems our special guest is the humble type." The congregation's response was muted, scattered laughter that dissipated quickly into uncomfortable silence. Something unprecedented was happening in a space where every moment was typically scripted for maximum impact. Joel's eyes darted to the production booth, seeking guidance, but found only the same uncertainty reflected back. He made a quick decision. "Let's welcome him properly," Joel announced, gesturing broadly. "Marcus, would you please escort our distinguished visitor to the stage?" It was a masterful move, reclaiming control while appearing generous. The congregation applauded on cue, their reaction guided by years of conditioned response to Joel's leadership. Marcus Hall approached Chuck Norris again, leaning down to speak privately. "Sir, Pastor Joel is inviting you to the stage." Chuck looked up, his eyes clear and direct. "Thank you, but I didn't come here to be on display." Marcus hesitated, caught in the impossible space between two immovable forces. "Sir, it would be easier if you'd join him briefly." "Easier isn't always better," Chuck replied quietly. From the media section, Tina Alvarez zoomed her camera in tighter, capturing the exchange. Though she couldn't hear the words, the body language told a compelling story: authority meeting quiet resistance, neither yielding. On stage, Joel maintained his smile, but those who knew him well could see the tightness around his eyes. The seconds stretched uncomfortably as the congregation watched Marcus return to the center aisle, alone. "Pastor," Marcus said into his headset. "Mr. Norris respectfully declines." Joel's expression flickered just slightly before recovering. "I see." A murmur rippled through the crowd. In 15 years of ministry at Lakewood, no one had ever declined Joel Osteen's invitation to the stage. Lisa Osteen rose from her front row seat and walked quietly to the steps leading up to the platform. Her movement, graceful but unplanned, drew her husband's attention. She gestured subtly, asking for his microphone. Joel hesitated, then crossed to his wife. The two exchanged whispered words, their backs to the congregation. "You're handling this wrong," Lisa said softly, her smile never faltering for the cameras. "This isn't about control. He's disrupting my service. Joel replied through his own camera, ready smile. By sitting quietly? Lisa raised an eyebrow. Listen to what's happening here, Joel. Before he could respond, she turned to the congregation, microphone in hand, her voice warmer and less rehearsed than her husband's filled the space. While Pastor Joel and our guests sort things out, let me share something that's been on my heart lately. She moved center stage with natural ease. I've been thinking about what it means to worship authentically. Not for show, not for others, but in spirit and truth. The congregation settled, their attention shifting to Lisa's unexpected intervention. Joel stood slightly behind her, his expression pleasantly neutral, but his body language tense. In the back row, Chuck watched with quiet interest as the dynamic shifted. The woman on stage was speaking from somewhere genuine, a notable contrast to the performance that had preceded her. Marcus Hall returned to his position near the back entrance, his professional demeanor intact but his thoughts troubled. In 8 years of security work at Lakewood, he'd removed hecklers, managed medical emergencies, and escorted overly enthusiastic worshipers back to their seats, but never had he been asked to confront someone for the crime of sitting quietly. As Lisa continued her impromptu message about authenticity, Joel pressed his earpiece and whispered to the production director, "Get me background on Norris. Why is he here? Who invited him?" The response came back quickly. No advance notice. Appears he came in through regular entrance. No entourage. Joel frowned slightly. Celebrities at Lakewood were typically handled with careful protocols, VIP parking, private entrances, predetermined photo opportunities. Chuck's presence, as an ordinary worshiper, defied categorization. Elder Henry watched the unfolding scene with growing fascination. He'd served at Lakewood since before it had moved into the former sports arena, since before the polished production values and international broadcasts. He remembered smaller days, humbler services, when ministry was measured by depth rather than reach. Remarkable, he whispered to himself, observing how a famous man's silence was proving more powerful than a famous preacher's words. Lisa concluded her thoughts with gentle poise. So perhaps today, God is reminding us that faith isn't always about what happens on this stage. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments. The still, small voice. She turned and handed the microphone back to Joel with a meaningful look. Joel took it, squeezing his wife's hand in a gesture that appeared affectionate to the cameras but conveyed a different message entirely. He stepped forward, reclaiming center stage. "Thank you, Lisa, for those heartfelt words." His voice resumed its confident cadence. "And she's right, sometimes God speaks through unexpected circumstances." He paused, seeming to consider his next move carefully. The congregation waited. The cameras held steady. In the production booth, technicians watched nervously, unsure where this unscripted moment might lead. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Joel finally said, his tone shifting to something more direct. "Our security team was simply doing their job, looking out for any disruption to our worship. But perhaps in our eagerness to create the perfect environment, we sometimes miss the perfect moment." It was a skillful pivot, acknowledging the awkwardness while reframing it as a teaching opportunity. The congregation responded with approving murmurs. "So, Mr. Norris," Joel continued, speaking directly to the back of the room, "while we would be honored to have you join us on stage, we respect your desire for privacy. We're just blessed to have you worship with us today." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Joel had found his footing again, transforming potential embarrassment into magnanimous respect. On the surface, balance was restored. But something had fundamentally shifted. Throughout the vast arena, phones remained raised, not toward Joel but toward the back row where Chuck Saturday, the congregation's focus had split. The carefully directed attention now divided between the man on stage and the man who had refused to join him there. Chuck himself remained unchanged, neither pleased by the acknowledgement nor bothered by the attention. His stillness carried its own strange authority, a presence that seemed to grow more compelling precisely because he made no effort to compel. Joel sensed the division of focus and made another quick decision. In fact, let's do something different today. His voice took on a tone of spontaneous inspiration. Marcus, would you please bring a microphone to our special guest? Perhaps he'd be willing to share a brief word from where he's seated. It was another masterful move respecting Chuck's refusal to come to stage, while still incorporating him into the service's flow. The congregation's energy lifted at this compromise. Marcus took a wireless microphone and approached Chuck again, aware that cameras now tracked his every movement. Mr. Norris, Pastor Joel is asking if you'd share a few words with the congregation. He offered the microphone with professional courtesy. Chuck looked at the microphone, then up at Marcus. His eyes held no criticism, only a gentle certainty. I appreciate the invitation, he said, his voice carrying naturally without need of amplification. But I didn't come here to speak. I came to listen. Marcus stood awkwardly, microphone still extended. Sir, it would mean a lot to everyone. Chuck's expression softened. Son, sometimes the most important message is silence. The exchange was picked up by nearby congregants, who whispered it to others. Like ripples in still water, the words spread through the arena. The meaning shifted slightly with each retelling. But the essence remained. The famous visitor had refused the spotlight not once, but twice. On stage, Joel waited, his smile firmly in place but tension visible in his shoulders. When Marcus returned without Chuck's participation, Joel faced a crucial choice: press the issue or release control. The congregation watched, collectively holding their breath. The service had veered so far from its usual carefully orchestrated flow that anything seemed possible. Joel's decision came with practiced poise. Well, folks, it seems our guest truly came to worship, not to be recognized. His laugh seemed genuine, if slightly strained. And isn't that a powerful reminder for all of us? In a world of selfies and social media, sometimes the greatest strength is found in humility. It was a beautiful recovery, transforming rejection into a sermon illustration. The congregation responded with enthusiastic applause, but the dynamic had been irrevocably altered. In a space designed to focus all attention forward and upward toward the platform, every consciousness remained aware of the quiet presence in the back row. The man who had commanded attention precisely by refusing to demand it. Elder Henry nodded slowly to himself, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. In the midst of modern ministry's carefully crafted experience, something ancient and authentic had broken through the simple power of a faith too deep for display. And as Joel launched into an abbreviated version of his planned message, his words seemed to echo slightly hollow against the profound silence that had briefly filled Lakewood Church. The sermon continued, but the real message had already been delivered. The atmosphere inside Lakewood Church had transformed. Though Joel continued his sermon with professional polish, his words seemed to hover above the congregation rather than penetrate within. 20,000 people sat in physical attendance, but their emotional presence had scattered, some still focused on stage, others stealing glances toward the back row, many lost in unexpected contemplation. When God has favor on your life, Joel declared, voice rising with practiced inspiration, no person, no circumstance, no challenge can keep you from your destiny. The words rang through perfect acoustics, but the usual response, the collective amens and nods of approval, felt muted and perfunctory. Something had shifted beneath the surface of Lakewood's carefully maintained veneer. In the production booth, technicians exchanged uncertain glances. The service's timing was off, the energy disrupted. Camera operators who typically knew exactly where to point their lenses now found themselves torn between capturing Joel's performance and documenting the quiet figure whose non-participation had somehow become the morning's most compelling storyline. Joel sensed the disconnection between himself and his congregation. 15 years of performing had given him an almost supernatural awareness of audience engagement. He could feel their attention drifting, their emotional investment split. His words continued smoothly, while his mind raced through options for recapturing what had been lost. Lisa Osteen sat in the front row again, her expression composed but her thoughts turbulent. She had watched her husband build his ministry on positivity and inspiration, a glossy, uplifting version of faith that packed arenas, but sometimes left her wondering what lay beneath the surface. Today, that surface had been punctured by the simplest of acts. A man sitting quietly, refusing to perform. In the back section, Chuck Norris remained exactly as he had been, attentive but still, engaged, but not swept up in the emotional current. Joel worked so carefully to generate. His weathered face revealed nothing beyond thoughtful observation. Yet his presence had become the gravitational center around which the service now orbited. Near him, Marcus Hall maintained his professional stance, but his internal landscape had shifted dramatically. 8 years of unquestioning service to Lakewood's vision suddenly felt less certain. The man he'd been sent to confront, to remove for the crime of non-participation, had demonstrated more genuine strength in silence than most men achieve, with a lifetime of words. Tina Alvarez adjusted her camera's focus, capturing the contrast between Joel's energetic performance and Chuck's composed stillness. As a journalist, she recognized the rare story unfolding before her. Not the planned puff piece about Lakewood's inspirational reach, but something far more nuanced about authenticity, celebrity, and the nature of spiritual power. Joel's sermon approached its climax, his voice reaching for the emotional crescendo that typically preceded the offering collection. Your breakthrough is just around the corner. Your miracle is on its way. But even as the words left his mouth, Joel made a split-second decision. The usual service flow would need adjustment. The atmosphere wasn't right for the standard appeal. Instead, he pivoted smoothly. Before we continue, I feel led to do something different today. His tone suggested divine inspiration rather than strategic adjustment. Sometimes God disrupts our plans to reveal something deeper. The congregation leaned forward slightly, sensing the unplanned moment. I'd like to invite our guest, Joel began, but then stopped himself. No, that's not right. I'd like to ask Elder Henry to come forward and lead us in prayer. A surprised murmur rippled through the crowd. Elder Henry, though respected and beloved, was rarely featured in main services. At 80, his deliberate pace and old-school delivery contrasted sharply with Lakewood's polished efficiency. He represented a connection to the church's humbler past. Before television deals and best-selling books, Elder Henry rose slowly from his seat, surprise evident on his weathered face. He made his way to the stage with unhurried dignity, each step measured and intentional. Joel welcomed him with a camera-ready embrace, whispering something in the older man's ear before handing him the microphone. The elder stood center stage, his simple suit and plain tie a stark contrast to Joel's designer styling. He adjusted his glasses and gazed out at the vast congregation without speaking for several long moments. The silence so rare in Lakewood's carefully programmed services spread through the arena. No background music filled the void. No cameras panned for reaction shots. Just an old man standing quietly, gathering his thoughts before 20,000 people. "I've been a part of this church for 62 years, Elder Henry finally said, his voice carrying none of Joel's practiced modulation but somehow filling the space just as completely. "I remember when we gathered in a converted feed store. When our entire congregation could fit in this stage area. When we knew each other's names and troubles and triumphs." He paused, looking out across the sea of faces. "Now, look at what God has done. 20,000 souls gathered. Millions more watching. A reach beyond anything we could have imagined." The congregation nodded, expecting the usual narrative of divinely ordained growth and success. But Elder Henry took an unexpected turn. "And yet, I sometimes wonder what we've lost in the gaining." His words fell like stones into still water. When spectacle replaces intimacy, when performance overshadows presence. Joel's expression remained pleasant, but those close enough could see the tightness around his eyes. This wasn't what he had anticipated when calling the elder forward. "Today," Elder Henry continued, "something remarkable happened. A man of considerable worldly fame joined us not for recognition, not for special treatment, but simply to worship. And when our spotlights found him, he declined them. When our stage beckoned, he remained seated." All eyes shifted instinctively toward the back row, where Chuck sat motionless, his expression revealing neither pride nor discomfort at being the subject of discussion. In that moment, Elder Henry said, his voice gaining strength, "I was reminded of Matthew 6. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them." A hush fell over the congregation. The verse rarely quoted at Lakewood hung in the air like a challenge. "Our brother in the back row demonstrated something powerful today." Elder Henry's gaze swept across the congregation. "That true strength lies not in being seen, but in being authentic. Not in performing faith, but in living it." Marcus Hall, still positioned near the back section, felt something shift within him, as if long-dormant questions were finally finding voice. Lisa Osteen leaned forward slightly, her attention fully captured by the elder's words. For years, she had harbored private doubts about the direction of the ministry, the growing emphasis on positivity over depth, on production value over spiritual substance. Now those thoughts were being spoken aloud on the very stage her husband had built. Joel stood slightly behind Elder Henry, his expression carefully neutral, hands clasped in a posture of respect. But those who knew him well could see the calculation behind his eyes. How to regain control. How to redirect the narrative. How to maintain the carefully constructed image upon which his ministry was built. Elder Henry turned slightly, gesturing toward Chuck without directly pointing. "I don't know why our brother chose to join us today. I don't know what brought him to our doors. But I thank God for his presence and for the gentle reminder that sometimes the most powerful sermon is not preached from pulpits, but lived in quiet moments of authentic faith." The congregation responded with the first genuinely spontaneous applause of the morning, scattered at first, then building into something sustained and heartfelt. It wasn't the usual prescribed response to Joel's emotional cues, but something organic and unexpected. Joel stepped forward smoothly, placing a hand on Elder Henry's shoulder in a gesture that appeared supportive while subtly reclaiming the stage. "Thank you, Elder, for that powerful reminder." He turned to face the congregation, professional smile firmly in place. "And I believe that's exactly why God orchestrated today's unexpected moments, to remind us all that beneath the lights and cameras, faith is deeply personal." It was a masterful pivot, incorporating the elder's challenging message into the larger Lakewood narrative, transforming potential disruption into planned spiritual insight. But throughout the vast space, something had fundamentally changed. The carefully maintained flow had been broken, revealing currents of authenticity that ran deeper than the polished surface. From her position in the media section, Tina Alvarez sensed the shift immediately. This was no longer a story about celebrity attendance or minor disruption. This was about two fundamentally different approaches to faith, colliding in real time: the spectacular versus the sincere, the performance versus the personal. As Joel attempted to guide the service back to its planned conclusion, a single congregant stood up several rows ahead of Chuck. Then, another, and another, until dozens of people throughout the arena had risen to their feet, turning to face not the stage, but the back row where Chuck Norris Saturday. It wasn't planned. It wasn't orchestrated. It was the rarest of things in Lakewood's scripted environment, a genuinely spontaneous response. Chuck himself appeared momentarily surprised, his composure slipping for the first time that morning. He glanced around as more people stood, their faces turned toward him with expressions of respect and recognition, not for his celebrity, but for the authenticity he had demonstrated. Joel watched from stage, his microphone temporarily forgotten in his hand. For perhaps the first time in 15 years of ministry at Lakewood, events were unfolding completely outside his control. Lisa Osteen rose slowly from her front row seat, turning to face the back of the church like so many others. Her eyes met Joel's for a brief moment, not challenging, but questioning. Then she turned away, her decision made visible before 20,000 witnesses. Marcus Hall watched the scene unfold with a soldier's trained assessment of shifting dynamics. Power was realigning before his eyes, not through confrontation or drama, but through the quiet authority of authenticity challenging performance. Joel's microphone remained silent for several long seconds, an eternity in broadcast terms. The production director's voice urgently prompted through his earpiece. "Pastor, we need to move forward. Collection and closing are scheduled for the next 12 minutes. The reminder of timing and structure seemed to snap Joel back to professional awareness. He raised the microphone, voice resuming its practiced cadence. "What a beautiful moment of recognition," he said, somehow incorporating even this unplanned rebellion into his narrative. "Let's thank our special guest for inspiring such a powerful response." He led applause that felt somehow hollow against the organic energy filling the space. The standing congregants remained standing, facing away from the stage, their posture a silent but profound statement. Chuck finally stood in response, not with the practiced showmanship of a celebrity acknowledging fans, but with the simple dignity of a man respecting those who showed him respect. He nodded once, then gestured gently for people to return their attention to the service. It was this, his redirection of focus away from himself, that finally completed the power shift. In that moment, Chuck had demonstrated more genuine leadership than all the amplified exhortations from stage. People began to sit, turning back toward the platform. But something fundamental had changed in their engagement. The passive consumption of spiritual entertainment had been disrupted by a taste of something authentic. Joel sensed it immediately, the change in quality of attention. These were no longer spectators but witnesses, no longer audience, but participants. Their expectations had shifted, and his usual approach would no longer suffice. With the instincts of a born performer, Joel adapted. His voice lowered, shedding some of its practiced modulation. His gestures became smaller, more natural. Even his language shifted, moving away from branded catchphrases toward something more straightforward. "Let's take a moment," he said, his tone notably different, "to reflect on what truly matters. Beyond the lights, beyond the cameras, beyond the spectacular." The congregation settled into an attentive silence, different from the energetic anticipation they typically brought to Joel's performances. This was something deeper, more contemplative. Elder Henry watched from the side of the stage, his weathered face revealing a complex mixture of emotions: hope, uncertainty, and something like vindication. For years, he had quietly grieved the transformation of worship into entertainment. Now, in the most unexpected way, something authentic had broken through the carefully maintained facade. In the back row, Chuck Norris returned to his seated position, hands folded in his lap, expression revealing nothing beyond calm attention. Yet his brief moment of acknowledgement had shifted everything, not through words or display, but through the simple power of genuine humility. Tina Alvarez continued filming, recognizing that the story unfolding before her was infinitely more valuable than the puff piece she'd been assigned. This wasn't just about celebrity attendance or minor disruption. This was about the collision of two fundamentally different approaches to faith, the spectacular versus the sincere, the performative versus the authentic. Joel proceeded with the remainder of the service, but with subtle differences that the regular attendees noticed immediately. His voice carried less performance and more presence. His prayer seemed directed upward rather than outward. Even his closing blessing felt somehow more personal, less rehearsed. As the final worship song began, cameras that would typically focus exclusively on stage occasionally panned to capture the congregation, including discreet shots of Chuck in the back row not featured or highlighted, but acknowledged as part of the community rather than a disruption to it. When the service concluded, Joel made an unexpected announcement. "Before we dismiss, I'd like to personally welcome our special guest." His tone carried genuine humility, perhaps for the first time that morning. Not with spotlights or special recognition, but with the simple appreciation of one believer to another. "Chuck, thank you for joining us today, and for the unexpected blessing your presence has brought." The acknowledgement, stripped of showmanship or strategic calculation, felt sincere. Throughout the congregation, people sensed the shift in their pastor's approach, many nodding in quiet approval. Chuck responded with a simple nod, neither accepting nor rejecting the acknowledgement, simply receiving it with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire presence. As the congregation began to disperse, the usual post-service energy felt different. Conversations clustered around what had happened rather than what had been said. People moved more slowly, more thoughtfully, as if awakening from a shared trance into more individual awareness. Marcus Hall maintained his position near the back exit, watching as congregants filed past Chuck, many nodding respectfully, but few approaching directly, sensing intuitively that the man valued privacy over attention. When Chuck finally rose to leave, Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Norris," he said, professional demeanor intact but eyes revealing deeper emotion, "I want to apologize for earlier." Chuck shook his head slightly. "No apology needed. You were doing your job." "My job," Marcus replied, the words feeling suddenly hollow. "But maybe not the right thing." Chuck studied him for a moment, then offered his hand. "Sometimes the hardest discipline is questioning what we're asked to do." Marcus accepted the handshake, feeling something profound in the simple contact strength that had nothing to prove, confidence that required no display. Near the main platform, Joel and Lisa Osteen stood surrounded by the usual post-service admirers, seeking brief moments of connection with their spiritual celebrities. But Joel's attention remained divided, his awareness repeatedly drifting toward the back of the sanctuary where Chuck was making his quiet exit. Lisa leaned close to her husband. "You should go to him." Joel hesitated, the instinctive calculation of public perception warring with genuine impulse. "The people expect me here." "Today isn't about expectations," Lisa replied softly. "You know that." Elder Henry approached them, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the shepherd needs to leave the 99. The biblical reference struck Joel deeply. With a brief nod to his wife, he excused himself from the receiving line and made his way toward the back of the church. The congregation parted before him, some surprised, others nodding in approval as they recognized his destination. Camera operators scrambled to adjust their positions, capturing this unexpected movement away from the usual post-service script. Tina Alvarez tracked Joel's progress through her viewfinder, sensing the story's arc shifting toward something unexpected. This wasn't damage control or image management. The cameras had already stopped broadcasting. This was something more personal. Chuck had nearly reached the exit when Joel caught up with him. The two men stood facing each other, one accustomed to commanding attention, the other comfortable without it. "Mr. Norris," Joel began, then corrected himself. "Chuck, I wanted to speak with you privately." Chuck nodded once. "Of course." Joel glanced around at the lingering congregants, many watching the exchange with undisguised interest. "Perhaps somewhere less public." "Public or private?" Chuck replied, his voice carrying no judgment. Truth is truth. The simple statement hung between them, a gentle challenge to the carefully maintained separation between Joel's public persona and private thoughts. For a moment, Joel seemed uncertain, the practiced confidence giving way to something more vulnerable. Then he nodded, accepting the implicit challenge. "You're right," he said, the words carrying more weight than expected. "I owe you an apology. What happened today? The misunderstanding, the awkwardness that falls on me, on the culture I've created here." Chuck's expression remained neutral. "Cultures can change." "Yes," Joel agreed, a thoughtful pause following the word. "They can." Around them, congregants had grown still, many lingering to witness this unprecedented moment, their pastor speaking not from stage, but from ground level, not with performed certainty, but with genuine humility. "I'd like to talk more," Joel said finally, "not as pastor and visitor, but as two men of faith." Chuck considered this, then nodded. "I'd be honored." The two men shook hands, a simple gesture captured by dozens of phone cameras, yet somehow private in its authenticity. No spotlights, no stage, no amplification, just a moment of genuine connection that would echo far beyond the walls of Lakewood Church. As Chuck finally turned to leave, Marcus Hall stepped forward to escort him through the crowd. But his demeanor had changed subtly, no longer guarding against disruption, but showing respect to the quiet dignity that had transformed the morning's worship. Elder Henry observed from a distance, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. In 60 years of ministry, he had witnessed countless services, hundreds of sermons, dozens of spiritual movements, but rarely had he seen such profound impact from such simple presence. "The greatest sermon," he whispered to himself, "is a life well lived." Throughout the vast arena, the atmosphere had changed, as if a fresh current of authenticity had swept through the carefully maintained environment, leaving everything outwardly the same yet inwardly transformed. And in that transformed space, something new was beginning to take root. Monday morning dawned bright over Houston, the October sky scrubbed clean by overnight rain. Inside Lakewood Church's administrative wing, the weekly staff meeting had veered dramatically from its usual agenda. Instead of reviewing service metrics and planning upcoming programs, Joel Osteen sat listening as team members processed yesterday's unexpected events. The digital director reported, scrolling through analytics. "Video clips have over 12 million views. Comments are running 10 to 1 positive. The press is requesting statements," added the communications director. "Every major network, plus international outlets." Joel nodded, his usual energetic engagement notably subdued. He'd spent a restless night replaying the service in his mind, not with a producer's eye for improvement, but with growing awareness of something deeper that had been revealed. "What are they saying?" he asked, the commenters, the viewers. The digital director glanced down at her notes. It's interesting. They're not focusing on the celebrity angle as much as we expected. It's more about the contrast. Contrast? Joel prompted. Between the production and the authenticity, she replied carefully. People are calling it a genuine moment of faith in an unlikely setting. The implied criticism hung in the air. Several staff members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at their pastor for his reaction. Joel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Marcus Hall, who stood near the door, not typically included in executive meetings but specially invited today. Marcus, you were there. Right in the middle of it. What did you see? Marcus straightened, uncomfortable with the sudden attention but determined to speak honestly. I saw strength, sir. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that doesn't need it. Lisa Osteen, seated beside her husband, nodded slightly. That's exactly it. Joel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The room waited for his response for the positive spin, the strategic reframing that typically followed any challenge to Lakewood's carefully crafted image. Instead, he asked a question that left the room in stunned silence. What if we've been getting it wrong? Nervous glances circulated among the leadership team. This wasn't the Joel Osteen they knew, the relentlessly positive, forward-focused pastor who transformed every setback into opportunity. Not entirely wrong, Joel clarified, seeing their discomfort. But imbalanced. So focused on inspiration that we've lost sight of authenticity. So concerned with reaching more people that we've forgotten about reaching deeper. Lisa placed a hand on her husband's arm, a small gesture of support visible to everyone present. She had watched him struggle through the night, wrestling not with public perception but with genuine self-examination. Joel, the executive pastor interjected. One unusual service doesn't negate 15 years of growth and impact. Our model works, millions reached, lives changed. Does it though? Joel's question carried no defensiveness, only sincere inquiry. Are we changing lives, or just making people feel better temporarily? Are we building faith, or selling inspiration? The distinction so rarely articulated in Lakewood's culture silenced the room again. Outside in the hallway, Tina Alvarez waited for her scheduled interview, able to hear portions of the discussion through the partially open door. Her producer had negotiated exclusive access for a follow-up story, expecting Lakewood's usual masterful public relations approach. What she was hearing instead sounded remarkably like genuine soul-searching. Back inside, Joel continued his unexpected reflection. Yesterday, a man demonstrated more spiritual impact through silence than I often achieve with an hour of amplified speaking. But that's Chuck Norris, someone objected. His platform, his reputation. No, Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. It wasn't about his fame. If anything, he was actively refusing to use it. Joel nodded, something resolving in his expression. Exactly. And that's what affected everyone so deeply, including me. He stood, moving to the window, overlooking the massive, empty sanctuary below. I've built a ministry on visibility, on performance, on production values. What if that's not what people truly hunger for? No one responded. The question challenged not just Lakewood's approach, but the foundation of modern megachurch culture itself. Joel turned back to face his team. I had coffee with Chuck this morning. The announcement surprised everyone. No one had known about the meeting, no photographers present, no social media posts, none of the usual documentation that accompanied Joel's every public interaction. What did he say? Lisa asked, though her expression suggested she already knew parts of the conversation. Not much, actually. Joel smiled slightly. He listens more than he speaks. But what he did say, it stayed with me. The room waited as Joel gathered his thoughts. He said that true strength isn't in being seen, but in seeing clearly. Not in being heard, but in listening deeply. Joel's voice carried none of its usual performance quality, just simple reflection. He talked about his own journey away from the spotlight, how fame nearly destroyed him before faith redirected him. Marcus nodded, recognizing in this description the quiet authority he had witnessed firsthand. Then, he said something that really struck me, Joel continued. He said, "The greatest act of worship isn't praise that lifts man up where God can see him, but humility that brings man down where God can use him." The quote resonated through the room, its simple depth contrasting with the motivational soundbites that typically characterized Lakewood's messaging. "So what are you proposing?" the executive pastor asked, concern evident in his tone. "We can't just abandon our approach overnight. Millions depend on our positive message." "Not abandon," Joel clarified. "Deepen. Authenticate." He moved back to the conference table, a new certainty in his movements. "Chuck is returning for this Sunday's service." Surprise rippled through the room. "Not as a celebrity guest," Joel continued. "Not for recognition or special treatment. He'll sit wherever he chooses, participate however he feels led. No cameras seeking him out, no special acknowledgement." The media director looked confused. "Then why announce his presence at all?" "I'm not announcing it to the public," Joel explained. "I'm telling you because I'm changing Sunday's format. No lights, no production, no performance." The statement landed like a physical shock. Several staff members began speaking at once, their objections overlapping. The broadcast, the sponsors, the expectations. Joel raised a hand, silencing the protests with gentle authority. "Just one service. A test, if you will. A chance to experience worship, stripped of spectacle, to see what remains when performance is removed." Lisa's expression showed quiet pride, as if witnessing her husband finally voicing doubts she had carried privately for years. "And if it fails?" the executive pastor asked. "If people are disappointed? If donations drop?" Joel considered the question seriously. "Then we'll have learned something valuable about what our congregation truly seeks." He paused, then added, "And about what we're truly offering." Marcus Hall, still standing near the door, felt a profound respect growing for the man he had served for 8 years. This wasn't the calculated decision of a religious CEO, but the authentic wrestling of a spiritual leader facing hard truths. Tina Alvarez, still waiting in the hallway, had given up any pretense of not listening. The story unfolding was far more significant than she had anticipated, not a celebrity encounter or PR management, but the potential transformation of America's largest megachurch. Inside, Joel concluded the meeting with uncharacteristic brevity. "We'll gather again tomorrow to work out the details. For now, I'd ask you all to reflect on why you came into ministry in the first place, before the success, before the size, before the systems. What was the core that called you?" As the team dispersed, their expressions revealed the varied impact of Joel's challenge, some inspired, others concerned, all processing something unexpected. Lisa remained beside her husband as the room emptied. "You surprised them," she said quietly. "I surprised myself," Joel admitted. "Are you ready for what might happen Sunday?" Joel considered her question carefully. "I don't know, but I'm ready to find out." Marcus was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Pastor Joel?" Joel looked up. "Yes, Marcus?" "Thank you," Marcus said simply, "for listening to what happened instead of just managing it." Joel nodded, receiving the affirmation with genuine humility. Sometimes the hardest person to hear is yourself. As Sunday approached, word spread throughout Houston's Christian community about changes coming to Lakewood's service. No official announcement had been made, but staff whispers became congregant rumors, which evolved into social media speculation. The weekly attendance of 20,000 was expected to swell even further, driven by curiosity about what Joel Osteen had planned. What no one outside the core team knew was just how radical the change would be. Sunday morning arrived with unexpected fog shrouding Houston's skyline. The usual vibrant sunrise that illuminated Lakewood's glass facade was muted, creating an atmosphere of gentle mystery rather than spectacular revelation. Inside, the transformation was immediately apparent. The massive LED screens that typically displayed lyrics, scripture, and magnified images of Joel remained dark. The elaborate stage lighting had been reduced to simple illumination. The platform itself had been stripped of its usual decorative elements, leaving only a wooden pulpit at its center. Most shocking of all, the first 5 rows of seats had been removed. In their place, arranged in a semicircle, sat simple wooden chairs reminiscent of the furniture from Lakewood's earliest days as a small storefront church. As congregants entered, their reactions ranged from confusion to curiosity. Regular attendees looked around for explanation, while first-time visitors, many drawn by social media buzz, wondered if they had somehow misunderstood Lakewood's reputation for spectacular production. In the production booth, a skeleton crew monitored basic audio and a single camera for the live stream. None of the elaborate switching, effects, or multiple angles that typically characterized Lakewood's broadcasts. 10 minutes before the scheduled service time, Joel Osteen entered not from the usual backstage area, but through a side door normally used by congregants. He wore no microphone, carried no notes, and was dressed not in his customary suit but in simple slacks and an open-collared shirt. Lisa walked beside him, their hands clasped in a gesture not of staged affection but genuine support. Whispers rippled through the congregation as they made their way not to the platform but to the wooden chairs arranged at the front. Elder Henry was already seated there, along with several other long-time church members of various ages. No hierarchy, no special placement, just a circle of believers. As the usual service start time arrived, the typical countdown video and opening music sequence were notably absent. Instead, a simple piano began to play, not through the massive sound system, but from a single instrument rolled onto the floor near the circle of chairs. The congregation, unsure of protocol in this transformed environment, gradually settled into expectant silence. Joel stood and moved to the simple pulpit. Without amplification, his voice carried naturally through the space, quieter than usual, requiring attentive listening rather than passive reception. "Good morning," he began, the familiar greeting carrying unfamiliar weight. "Today, we're doing something different. Today, we're stripping away the production, the performance, the spectacle, not because those things are wrong, but because sometimes we need to set aside what's impressive to rediscover what's essential." The congregation leaned forward slightly, straining to hear words spoken rather than projected. "Last Sunday, something unexpected happened in this room. Many of you were here. You witnessed a moment of genuine spiritual reality breaking through our carefully maintained facade." Joel paused, visibly vulnerable in a way the congregation had never seen. "That moment has caused all of us on leadership, to reflect deeply on what worship truly is, on what church is meant to be." Throughout the vast space, phones remained lowered, attention fixed not on capturing content but on experiencing presence. "I've built a ministry on positivity, on inspiration, on making faith accessible and attractive," Joel continued, his voice carrying emotion rarely displayed from stage. "Those aren't bad things. But somewhere along the way, I fear we've confused inspiration with transformation. Attendance with engagement, production with presence. The honesty so different from Joel's usual carefully crafted messaging created a palpable tension throughout the arena. Some congregants exchanged uncertain glances, while others nodded in somber recognition. "Today won't be about me speaking," Joel said. "It will be about us listening, not to impressive words or elaborate music, but to the still, small voice that often gets drowned out by our own noise." He gestured to the circle of chairs. "We've invited some of our longest-serving members to join us here, not as special or important, but as representatives of our community's roots, of a time when church wasn't a production but a family gathering." Elder Henry nodded slightly, his weathered face revealing deep emotion. End of. And we've left one chair empty," Joel continued, indicating the single unoccupied seat in the circle. "Not for any specific person, but as a reminder that we're always incomplete, always waiting for the next person God will bring into our midst." As if on cue, though everyone present sensed it wasn't planned, the rear doors opened quietly. Chuck Norris entered, dressed simply in dark slacks and a button-down shirt. Like the previous Sunday, he moved without fanfare or announcement, slipping into a seat in the back row. A ripple of recognition passed through the congregation, but unlike the previous week, it quickly settled into respectful acknowledgement rather than disruptive excitement. Joel nodded once in Chuck's direction, a simple recognition of presence, not a spotlight or invitation to perform. Then he turned back to the congregation. "We've prepared no sermon today. No 3 points and a poem. No motivational message." His voice carried the weight of genuine conviction rather than practiced inspiration. "Instead, we're going to do something Lakewood hasn't done in many years. We're going to sit in silence together. To listen rather than be entertained, to seek presence rather than presentation." A murmur of uncertainty passed through the congregation. Silence wasn't part of Lakewood's brand of high-energy, feel-good spirituality. "If the silence makes you uncomfortable," Joel acknowledged, "that's okay. Sometimes discomfort is where growth begins. If you need to leave, we understand. But I invite you to stay, to experience what happens when we set aside spectacle and seek substance." He returned to his seat in the circle, the simple wooden chair, so different from his usual position at center stage. The silence spread gradually through the massive arena, 20,000 people growing still together. No music filled the void, no images flashed on screens, no voice guided the collective experience. At first, the silence felt awkward, even threatening. In the back rows, a few people quietly gathered their belongings and left. Others shifted uncomfortably, checking phones or watches, waiting for the real service to begin. But as minutes passed, something began to change. The quality of the silence deepened. Breathing slowed. The collective discomfort gradually transformed into collective presence. In the simple circle of chairs, Lisa reached for Joel's hand. Elder Henry closed his eyes, his expression one of peaceful recognition, as if greeting an old friend long missed. Other members of the circle sat with varied postures of receptivity, some with heads bowed, others with faces lifted, all present in a way that transcended performance. Throughout the congregation, similar transformations occurred. Some people wept quietly. Others sat with expressions of surprised discovery. Many simply breathed, experiencing perhaps for the first time the power of undistracted presence. In the back row, Chuck Norris sat with the quiet dignity that characterized his every movement, neither calling attention to himself nor hiding from it, simply being present with authentic integrity. Marcus Hall, positioned near the main entrance, found himself unexpectedly moved. In 8 years of security work, he had managed countless services, handled numerous disruptions, facilitated thousands of visitors. But he had rarely experienced worship, not as production or performance, but as genuine presence. Near the media section, Tina Alvarez lowered her camera, the professional detachment that typically separated her from her subjects dissolving in the face of something authentically moving. This wasn't the story she had come to capture, but it was perhaps the one she had always been seeking. After 20 minutes that somehow felt both eternal and fleeting, Joel rose quietly and returned to the simple pulpit. His face revealed evidence of his own emotional journey through the silence. "I don't have eloquent words to follow what we've just experienced," he said, voice carrying gentle authenticity rather than practiced modulation. "I simply want to thank you for your courage, in staying, in listening, in being present not just with the church but with yourselves and with God." He paused, visibly gathering thoughts that seemed to arise in the moment, rather than from preparation. Last week, a visitor to our church demonstrated something profound through his quiet presence. Today, I believe we've all had the opportunity to discover something similar, that sometimes the most powerful expression of faith isn't in spectacular display, but in humble authenticity. Throughout the arena, people nodded in quiet acknowledgement. "We'll return to more familiar patterns in the weeks ahead," Joel continued. "Music will play again. Lights will shine. Messages will be shared. But I pray that something of what we've experienced today will remain a foundation beneath the structure, a substance within the form." He looked out across the congregation, not with the calculated crowd awareness of a performer, but with the genuine connection of a fellow seeker. "Before we close, I want to invite anyone who feels led to come forward, not to the platform, but to this empty chair." He gestured to the single unoccupied seat in the circle. "Not to speak or perform, but simply to be present with us as we close in prayer." For several long moments, no one moved. The invitation, so different from Lakewood's usual altar calls, seemed to hang in the air, uncertain and vulnerable. Then, from midway back in the congregation, a middle-aged woman rose slowly and made her way forward. Her face revealed recent tears, her movements those of someone taking a significant step rather than responding to emotional manipulation. She approached the circle of chairs hesitantly, almost reverently, and sat in the empty seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. Joel nodded in simple acknowledgement, then returned to his own chair. No spotlights followed him. No cameras zoomed in for reaction shots. Just a circle of believers, complete now with the addition of one who had stepped forward not for recognition but for presence. Elder Henry reached across the circle, offering his weathered hand to the woman. She accepted it with visible gratitude. The connection spread hand to hand, person to person, until the circle was physically linked. In the vast congregation, similar connections formed organically. People reached for neighbors' hands, not directed by stage instruction, but moved by genuine impulse. Within moments, 20,000 individuals had become a connected community. Joel closed his eyes, his prayer unscripted and humble. "Father, we come before you not as performers but as seekers, not as speakers but as listeners. Teach us the power of authentic presence with you, with each other, with ourselves." The prayer continued, but throughout the arena, people heard different words, not broadcast through speakers, but whispered within, as if the silence had created space for individual communion rather than collective consumption. When Joel finally spoke the simple "Amen," it rippled through the congregation. Not as conclusion but as affirmation. So be it. Spoken by thousands of voices, with new awareness of what they were. Affirming. The service ended without dramatic flourish or emotional manipulation, simply people rising naturally, speaking quietly with neighbors, moving toward exits with thoughtful expressions rather than entertainment afterglow. Near the back row, several congregants approached Chuck Norris not for autographs or photos, but with simple handshakes and quiet words of appreciation. He received each interaction with humble dignity, neither seeking attention nor avoiding genuine connection. Joel remained in the circle of chairs, speaking quietly with those who had joined him there. No handlers rushed him toward the usual receiving line. No cameras documented the interactions. Just authentic moments of human connection. Marcus Hall watched from his position near the door, a profound sense of rightness settling in his chest. In 8 years of service, he had witnessed countless spectacular moments, but none that carried the simple power of what had unfolded today. Tina Alvarez packed her equipment slowly, her journalistic detachment permanently altered by participation in what she had come to document. The story she would file wasn't the one she had expected. It was both smaller and vastly larger, less sensational but infinitely more significant. As the congregation dispersed, they carried with them not inspirational catchphrases or emotional highs, but something more lasting, the memory of authentic presence, the experience of worship stripped to its essence, the recognition that faith's most powerful expressions often come not through spectacular display, but through humble authenticity. And in that recognition, something profound had been both remembered and reborn. The December sun cast long shadows across Houston's skyline as Joel Osteen reviewed the attendance figures on his desk. 2 months after what staff now called simply the silence, Lakewood Church told a story of transformation. Overall attendance had declined by 15%, but those who remained engaged differently. Small groups had doubled. Volunteer applications tripled. The prayer ministry was overwhelmed with both requests and offers to serve. Most surprisingly, donations had increased despite smaller attendance. People gave more per person, often with notes explaining their deeper connection to a church that had shown authentic vulnerability. Lisa entered with coffee and a knowing smile. The media team wants a final decision on Christmas Eve. Traditional spectacle or newer approach? What's your thought? Joel asked a simple question revealing their changed dynamic. Find the middle path, she offered. Beauty without spectacle. Meaning without manipulation. Joel nodded. Not abandoning production values, but ensuring they serve substance rather than substitute for it. They sat in comfortable silence, another change in their relationship. Before the silence, Joel had filled every moment with words and plans. Now he valued the spaces between, the moments of reflection that allowed deeper thought to emerge. Marcus Hall entered to announce the Christianity Today reporters had arrived for their interview about Lakewood's transformation. A story that had sparked discussions throughout American evangelical communities about authenticity and ekdom, the nature of worship. And, Marcus added, Mr. Norris confirmed for the Elder Council meeting tomorrow. Joel nodded with satisfaction. Since that transformative Sunday, Chuck had maintained a quiet but significant connection with Lakewood, attending occasionally and offering counsel when asked. His relationship had evolved into something unexpected, not celebrity endorsement, but genuine spiritual mentorship, particularly for Joel himself. The newly formed Elder Council represented one of the most significant structural changes at Lakewood. Power had been intentionally distributed, leadership broadened, decisions subjected to communal wisdom rather than charismatic authority. During the interview, the reporter seemed particularly interested in practical outcomes. You've lost some attendance. How do you reconcile that with your previous focus on growth? I've had to redefine success, Joel replied candidly. For years, I measured effectiveness by numbers, attendance, viewership, book sales. Now, I'm learning to value depth over breadth. The people who remain are engaging differently, more authentically, more transformatively. Would you say Chuck Norris saved Lakewood Church? The reporter asked finally. No, Joel replied after careful consideration. Chuck was the catalyst for something God had been trying to show us for a long time. His presence, his authenticity simply created space for truth to break through our carefully maintained facade. Later, Lisa showed Joel a social media trend that had emerged spontaneously. Number authentic worship. With posts from churches across the country experimenting with reduced production, increased participation, more silence, less spectacle. It's spreading, Joel observed. Not because of us, Lisa noted, because it's resonating with a hunger that was already there for substance beneath the spectacle, for connection beyond consumption. 6 months later, Lakewood hosted a special service commemorating their transformation. The massive arena was filled not to previous capacity, but with a congregation more engaged and authentically present than the larger crowds of the past. The stage had been permanently redesigned, simplified without being stark. The circle of chairs remained at the front, symbolic of the leadership shift from hierarchy to community. Joel stood among the people, his voice carrying natural authority rather than amplified performance. A year ago, a visitor came to our church. He sat quietly in the back row. When approached, he responded with humble presence. When invited to the spotlight, he declined without judgment, and in that simple act, he revealed how far we had drifted from our purpose. Near the back, in what had become his occasional place of worship, Chuck Norris listened with characteristic calm, neither seeking recognition nor avoiding genuine connection. What began that day continues among us now, a return to authenticity that feels less like innovation and more like remembering. We haven't abandoned growth or impact. We've simply remembered that depth must precede breadth, that transformation happens not through impression but through presence. As the service concluded, Joel greeted congregants at the exit. Chuck approached quietly, the two men embracing with genuine warmth. "Thank you," Joel said simply. Chuck shook his head slightly. "I just sat in a chair." "Sometimes," Joel replied, "that's the most powerful thing we can do, to simply be present, authentically ourselves, without performance or pretense." The two men stood for a moment in companionable silence. A media-trained pastor who had learned the power of authenticity, and an action hero who had discovered the strength of humility. Different paths, united in the recognition that true power often reveals itself not in what we do, but in who we are. The lesson taught without words, the sermon preached through silence, the strength revealed through restraint, these would remain as testimony to the enduring truth that the most powerful act is often not action at all, but authentic presence in a world desperate for something real. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.